Ladies and gentlemen, participants, head of the COP21, I welcome you all to this session dedicated to one of the most important goals, not only under the Agenda 2030, but it's also a topic which is a cross-cutting one, addressing climate change. In this specific case, how we can work together between the EU and Africa to produce renewable energy. Africa has already done a great deal of work setting up priorities and working methods within the partnership. And the European Union, I want to recognize Madame Royale's work within the COP21. It's now up to them to deliver. So we are here to launch an exchange about what we've achieved so far and what we can do in the future together. So we are addressing the goals, but also implementation. That's the topic that our panel will discuss after a quick round of discussions. We'll start with Commissioner Mimisa, President Condé, and then we will have a joint declaration between the Republic of Guinea, the EU and France, and then we'll have a panel with our institutional stakeholders, private sector representatives and policymakers. So without further delay, I would like to invite Commissioner Mimisa to speak to you by way of introduction. Commissioner, you have the floor.
Well, dear Mr. President, Madam President of the COP21, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this high-level panel on renewable energy investments in Africa. I'm honored to open this session with President Condé of Guinea, who is here with even more hats as President of the African Union and Chairperson of the African Renewable Energy Initiative, AREI. Africa is often described as a continent of many paradoxes, and perhaps nowhere in this more the case than when it comes to energy. It is home to 15% of the world's population, but accounts for less than 5% of global energy usage. As a region, it is one of the lowest emitters of greenhouse gases, but it bears some of the greatest burdens of climate change. Africa is richly endowed with enormous and largely untapped renewable energy sources, but it is still home to more than a half of a global population without access to modern forms of energy. With an ever-growing and increasing urban population, Africa's energy demands are rapidly outpacing current electrification rates. Consequently, too many people, mainly women and girls, are shackled to burdensome and often dangerous domestic chores. Too many innovators and entrepreneurs are unable to power their business. Too many communities are unable to develop, and even long-established industries cannot compete without access to modern forms of energy. Until now, overall levels of investment have remained low. Sub-Saharan Africa receives little over 1% of global investment in electricity networks. Yet, the International Renewable Energy Agencies estimates that up to 60% of Africa's total energy demands could be met by renewables by 2030. That includes over 100 gigawatts from wind, up to 300 gigawatts from hydro and solar energy, which could power Africa's electricity needs many times over. Just as Africa leapfrogged traditional fixed lines and desktops for mobile phones, the same could happen in the energy sector. Our African partners have defined an ambitious framework, through the Africa Union's Agenda 2063 and through the AREI, to transform this sector with a long-term target of providing 300 gigawatts of new renewable energy by 2030 and an intermediate target of 10 gigawatts by 2020. In support of Africa's ambitions, we have committed by 2020 to help to provide 30 million more people with access to sustainable energy in Africa, 5 gigawatts of renewable energy generation capacity, or half of the AREI's own overall target, and 11 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent savings per year. In total, we have committed 2.7 billion euros to support sustainable and clean energy in Africa up until 2020. Not only will this help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals on energy and climate change, but will also accelerate the transition to sustainable growth by boosting jobs, growth, and innovation, whilst contributing to gender equality, agriculture, and health. The task ahead may seem daunting. The cost of achieving universal energy access globally by 2030 is estimated to be more than 1 trillion euros. But the potential clearly is enormous. I'm proud to say that Europe is Africa's strongest trading partner and biggest investor. At the same time, European firms hold over 40% of global patents on renewable technologies, and the sector already employs over 1 million people in Europe. With African ambition and European expertise, I believe that not only can we increase the number of people with access to electricity, but in fact, we can and must diligently work to ensure that no one remains in the dark. The African Renewable Energy Initiative is an Africa-owned and Africa-led inclusive initiative that the European Union had committed to support and partner with since its launch. This initiative is perfectly aligned with the overall partnership between Europe and Africa, which aims to tackle global challenges together, including on energy and climate change. We have already done a lot. Thanks to European Union support, over 18 million more people already have access to sustainable energy. Last March, the AREI board welcomed a pipeline of 19 projects supported by African governments for a total investment potential of 4.8 billion euros, which will already contribute 1.8 gigawatts of renewable energy generation. But we still need to engage in a smarter way, and in doing, to catalyze greater investment from both the public and private sector. This is precisely the aim of projects like the Electrification Financing Initiative, we call it Electrify, that we launched last year with industry partners and financiers. The aim of Electrify is to share the risk of investing in energy projects, create a critical mass of bankable projects, and allow all parties to access the significant untapped market potential. We have already received almost 450 applications in the first 2 rounds, which show that this innovative model can be a game changer when it comes to unlocking and accelerating investment in sustainable energy. But it is not just about the money. We are also working extensively with our African partners through our EU delegations on the ground to improve the investment environment through political and technical support. This three-pillared approach, combining financing with policy and technical dialogue, is also a key feature of our proposals for a new European External Investment Fund, which could generate up to 44 billion euros of additional investments and which I hope will soon be operational. Our aim is to further reduce the barriers and create a conducive environment for investment in critical sectors, including renewables, in Africa and Europe's neighborhood. But in order to truly succeed, we must continue to reach out and to engage all partners even further in Europe and Africa, the public and private sectors, international financing institutions, and civil society. This is precisely the aim of our event today, which is another important milestone on the path to Green Economic Business Forum in October and the Africa-EU Summit in November. I'm therefore delighted to see so many high-level decision makers from the public and private sector, as well as civil society organizations here today. I am very much looking forward to the outcome of your fruitful discussions, given such an impressive panel and the wealth of knowledge and experience in this room. I hope that together we can supercharge the debate about energizing Africa and ultimately ensure that in the near future no one remains without access to clean, green and affordable energy. Thank you very much, and I look forward to today's panel.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Mimica. I would like to underline that Commissioner Mimica, since day one of his mandate, has made renewable energy a flagship for his mandate precisely. Therefore, has been, since the outset, one of the best allies for the result in Paris, but also for the implementation then of this agenda, in particular with Africa. Now, my pleasure, c'est mon plaisir d'inviter le président.
It's my great pleasure to welcome the President of the Republic of Guinea, the current President of the African Union, Mr. Alpha Condé.
Monsieur le Commissaire,
Honourable Commissioner, President of COP21, Commissioner of the African Union, I'm delighted to be here today to speak to you and to congratulate Madame Ségolène Royal, who has put all of her talents and determination towards this AREI project and who has helped us a great deal. I don't want to go into too much detail on what the Commissioner has already done. I just want to say that our job today is to talk about the role that Africa will play. We will speak with one voice and make sure that we are heard. The challenges that we have before us lies in making sure that Africa speaks with one voice. And we have set up an administrative board to manage these affairs, and we're sure that we will succeed. On the 6th of March, we selected 19 projects via that board. Some people said it wasn't Africa that chose those projects, but I want to be very clear about one thing. Africa has decided that from now on, it will determine its own fate. No one else will impose anything upon us. The European Union has committed to set up 5 gigawatts over the years to come, and that's a challenge as well. But if our partners are ready to do that, help us achieve that goal by 2020, then we know that the European Union, together with the African Union, will be able to make those projects a success. We know that we need to move quickly in order to do this. And I've written to all heads of state in Africa to ask what their favorite projects are so that we can move quickly and try and launch them. And there should be no controversy around how these projects were selected. If Africa is to speak with one voice, then we want to be heard. We have the King Mohammed VI of Morocco, who will be one of our representatives, and we have other heads of state and government taking up and championing specific causes. We have called for an initial technical meeting so that we can address issues raised by the administrative board. And now we need to make sure that we have enough support for AREI to make it operational. We have every partner being called upon to be clear about their commitments. The European Union has been very clear about its 5 gigawatt goal, and now we need to work on the details. During the G7, we had significant funds earmarked for this project. And now we need to be sure of the resources we have available. That's the first challenge. And then how can we improve cooperation and synergies between the EU and our African stakeholders? AREI is now in its active phase. We have already adopted 9 projects, and we need to accelerate this momentum, making sure that we make it truly operational. And we have launched calls to that end. And the next administrative board meeting at Addis Ababa will continue this work. We have had experts nominated to deal with the upcoming work as well. And then we will have a new system of governance set up for AREI. And the administrative board needs experts who are familiar with each subject. So we need different countries to nominate them to the administrative board, and that will be done in a very transparent manner. Now, I am part of this administrative board, and we will have an interim president to make sure that the transition to the next presidency is a smooth one. As far as our partnerships are concerned, we want to extend our partnerships to China and other countries, increasing the number of partners for co-financing. It's very important for us to do this because we want to improve life for vulnerable people, young people, women. And without energy, that will not be possible. Without energy, women will spend their entire days walking. And if they have energy, electricity, they will be able to be spared that. So we want to achieve this energy transition for Africa. So firstly, we need that energy to be produced, and then we need the infrastructure. Africa is rich in raw materials. We have those available to us, water and other materials. So what's the problem? We don't have the requisite level of development, be it because of terrorism or natural disasters. We need to achieve greater development. It's being hampered at the moment. Africa is not just a market, it can also produce. By 2050, it will have a huge population boom. And so it's clear that we are a growing market. And we will become a consuming market as well of ever more consumers. We need to make sure that African citizens are able to use new technologies. We are determined not to miss out on the 4th revolution, industrial revolution of digital technology. We want to make sure that we can access this technology, which is cheap, if not free. We want to make sure that we modernize and want to make sure that our citizens will be able to use that technology as soon as it's available. And countries like China are already doing this. We can see China is outsourcing a lot of their business. We could take the place of China as a driving force for development. We want to do that in partnership. We've seen waves of migration towards Europe, but we don't want that to be a problem. We want to be able to tackle the root causes of migration. That will only be possible if we achieve a greater level of development and tackle poverty. We also need to make sure that the resources available to our countries go to the most vulnerable, young people and women, for example. That is the responsibility of the heads of state and government in Africa. They have to have the courage to put that money towards the plight, improving the plight of the most vulnerable in their countries. That is our responsibility, which we are very aware of. We have to speak frankly to our partners, but also to one another. The African Union will have an increasingly important role to play here, not least in its partnership with the EU. We have adopted the principles that every country should set up a fund not just for going towards the African Union projects, but also projects co-financed by the African Bank of Development. We want to make sure that that funding goes to the right sources, the right projects. The African Union is taking decisions, and President Kagame noted that of the many decisions we have taken, some of them have remained without effect. We want to make sure that we focus on sound implementation of our legislation, of our decisions. We're going to set out a roadmap, therefore, which will outline the plans for future African Union work, including a free trade agreement, and there will be an upcoming report on that. We are not only outlining our particular situation, but also stressing that we want to take an important role here, an active role. If we are to combat nationalism, we need to make sure that we work together and not just criticize one another. We need to make sure that we really are responsible for the most vulnerable in our societies, and we are determined that Africa is going to make headway. It is not for others to dictate to us what the development policies will be. We will decide, and we will be able to better say what our needs are and how we can solve the challenges we face. And that's why I'm particularly delighted to be speaking to you here today, because I believe that we can speak with one voice, and I'm sure that then all African countries who voted for their candidate to represent them, we saw that they can speak with one voice. And this will make sure that our voice is heard. So I would like to thank the African Union for all of their support. We will make sure that that support will be ongoing. And in tackling the problem of climate change, we know that there's a significant problem of pollution in Africa. We don't want to allow that to happen. We want to make sure that the consequences of climate change will not be harmful for Africa, and we hope to help contribute to combating climate change for the greater good of all those living in Africa. So I thank you all for welcoming me here today. Thank you, Madame Ségolène Royal. And I want to stress that we in Africa are determined to build a better world with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now, as we announced, we're going to sign the joint agreement between the European Union, the French Republic, and the Republic of Guinea. So I'd like to ask Mr. Mimica, Commissioner, to come to the dais, and the Minister from Guinea to come to the dais, and also the French Minister to come to the dais as well.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador, Minister, and Commissioner.
One of this event is finishing, and therefore now just a few minutes to rearrange here the place, and then we pass to the second part, which will be a panel with a rich panel of representative of institution, of civil society, of private sector, in order to enter a bit more into the substance of this discussion. Just a few minutes, and then we're back. Thanks. So if everybody is ready, we can start the second part of this event. As usually here and everywhere, when we are conference, time is quite tight, and therefore let's say that we have a bit less than 1 hour to have this important debate. Therefore, first I would like to introduce the panelists. First, I will start with Madame Ségolène Royal, présidente de la COP21 et évidemment connue.
President of COP21 and known by you all because of her input as a French minister, but also as president of COP21 and her support for the AREI project. She's supported that tirelessly. And the second participant, Mr. Lapo Pistelli, who's Executive Vice President of ENI, the Ente Nazionale Idrocarburi. He has a lot of experience in government and in his current role, so dual experience. Mrs. Amani Abu Said is a Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy in the African Union. Bruno Benasson is the Chief Executive Officer of Africa NG. Pierre Guillain is a Vice President for Private Sector in the African Development Bank.
Director General, Deputy Head of Operation, European Investment Bank, Mr. Oliver Andrews, Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer of the Africa Finance Corporation, and then Mrs. Courtney Gaylor, young leader participating and selected among this program, which is aiming at empowering and participating to the policy setting of this new generation of leader of the world, young leader, Executive Director, the Better Tomorrow Movement from South Africa. Therefore, I would like to start immediately. I said the time is very short. My pleasure, mon plaisir de passer la
My pleasure now to give the floor to Madame Ségolène Royal for a contribution. I know also that she has to leave quite soon, but we'll be very interested to hear what she has to say to us. You have the floor, Madam. Thank you, Director General. This allows me to welcome you all, to say how much I appreciate the work and your commitment is. You allowed us, of course, to simplify things in decision-taking, facilitate decision-taking that the President of Guinea just referred to. The Administrative Board of AREI was able to decide on 19 projects, and I'd like to underline the fact that the Commission played an important role. They made the funds available and also simplified the procedures. Now, thanks to the excellent work done by Alpha Condé and the Commissioner, Mr. Mimica, I think this panel, this event is being held in a historic time, because just after the Americans have decided to leave the Paris Climate Agreement, it's very important that we can show that there still is a coalition, that the coalition built during the Paris Agreements continues, but will be strengthened and will become increasingly important because we are determined. The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has already reacted to the declaration made by the American President that France is still committed, alongside all the other countries that have ratified the Paris Agreement. 147 countries have ratified that Paris Agreement, and as President of COP21, I think we can't turn out, I say we can't, you can't unilaterally turn your back on that agreement. Article 28 of that agreement requires a 3-year leaving period and a year's notice. So it takes 4 years to leave the Paris Agreement, and COP21 wasn't just the Paris Agreement, but it's also a financing tool. It covers all the coalitions, the LNDCs, so national undertakings being made by each individual country to limit greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to keep an eye on all of these pillars, all of these parts of the Paris Agreement, to make sure that the renewable energies are achieved, that our efforts are not weakened but are strengthened indeed. Civil society has an important role to play in all this. We've seen views emerging on this, not just from companies, but also from cities, from regions. California, with Jerry Brown, who was there at COP21, I was able to sign a convention with him on operational agreements to reduce infra-national attempts or agreements to reduce greenhouse gases. Now, this is one of the most important coalitions at 21. There were undertaking taken by heads of state and government to find $10 billion, and it's one of the most symbolic parts of the Paris Agreement. So I'd like to very much congratulate the European Commission for organising this event here yesterday and today. At Conakry on the 4th of March, AREI did approve plans to create 47 gigawatts of energy. So what we have to do now is to follow all this up and make sure that the populations can actually see exactly that these projects are actually going to get up and running in various parts of Africa. Work is currently being done. I'd like to welcome the negotiator for Africa, who is fully aware of what's at stake here. The idea is to make sure that we have very flexible and efficient governance. The NGOs have had an opportunity to react. I met the NGOs recently, and we have to make sure that they are fully involved throughout the process because they have a lot to say. They are present in the various regions. They have very good ideas, not just on governance, but also on how then afterwards the projects could be piloted once they have been approved. So a couple of main principles on renewables in Africa. We have to improve visibility, make sure that everyone is visible. We have to make sure that we direct investments to good projects, not just with a list of projects where there are major infrastructure projects, hydroelectricity, for example, but also network and village-based projects that can link up large-scale projects with micro-installation projects that can bring electricity very quickly and very rapidly to village populations. We also need to ensure that we use the proper models economically that will encourage the creation of African countries locally, so that local electrification can be benefited from. People don't want high tension cables above their head passing by their villages, passing by villages where there is no electricity. We must make sure that the operators have signed undertakings to make sure that they supply electricity locally to those communities where their high tension cables pass overhead. The United Nations and me as president of COP AREI now has been able to highlight 400 projects. We have to make sure that we have all the necessary tools in place in order to generate investment. France has provided 6 million euros for this because we in France think that Paris hosted COP21 for setting up AREI, so we also therefore think that we have a responsibility to make sure that all this gets up and running properly. That's why we're making quite a large financial contribution. We also have to make sure that we don't discourage investment. We must multiply the leverage process involving private investors, private funds. We have to make sure that everything is done is rational and profitable, also to make sure that local development takes place. President Conte said exactly that Africa has agricultural lands, water, minerals, and underground resources. What are they lacking? They're lacking the infrastructure and electricity. And so quite a lot is at stake there to make sure that we can create climatic justice. The AREI is a very precious tool that we have to use and strengthen following the principles that I've outlined, basing ourselves on the African Development Bank and the European Union, all the various other actors, multinational and bilateral. The population of Africa really do expect and should be entitled to expect access to electricity. If the population increases faster than the speed at which we're able to provide electricity, then the electricity gap will widen. Electrification must happen faster and must be faster than population growth. And as they say in Africa, there's a proverb in Africa where we have to make sure that we harness all the energies, collective energies, to make sure that everything that's decided on at Paris on climate is actually done. I think the best way to do this, to prove that we can that we can succeed. And thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President, Madam Royale. I think you've made my job as a moderator much more simple because you've already illustrated how big the challenge is and what it is we are confronted with. And you've also outlined some beginnings of solutions.
Now, in the light of all this, we know which is the scale of the problem. We know that Africa is a continent of opportunity, because this we are saying this way. We know that there is growth. There is know that this sector is a sector which is producing jobs, growth, and opportunity in the world. We say that private sector now is involved into this and must be part of the solution. As European Union, we are now in the last, let's say, miles to set up a fund, which is the External Investment Fund, which is also equipped for the first time with a guarantee, which is aimed precisely to cover losses that private sector can risk in investing in Africa, in these and other sectors. Now, I would like to start with the private sector, therefore, asking what is missing, if anything, and if it's not missing, how we can translate all this into accelerated action. Also because, allow me to say, for once we have Africa, as President Condé said, speaking with one voice, because we have a list of priority, we have a method of working, we have institutions which are there. Therefore, if I start with private sector, what is missing, what do you need, what you intend to do in order to be not only partner, but very often the protagonist of all this? Maybe I can start with Mr. Lapo-Pistelli, can share also his mixed experience, let's say.
Thank you very much, Stefano. I would like to thank the European Commission because these EU development days are becoming a cornerstone of the European debate about this issue. And I think that we need a meeting like this because we have to share the agenda, we have to strengthen the awareness. But let me tell you that we need also to spread this awareness going beyond the development constituencies, especially in time of populism and so on. We need to spread this message going beyond the walls of this wonderful place. You said already, Stefano, which are the basic terms of the equation. So a huge demographic growth. I keep remembering that because there are astonishing numbers, but in 1950, European population was 2 times the African population. And in 35 years from now, the African population will be 3 times the European population. So in less than 100 years, Europe moved from being the double of something to be 1/3 of the other, of that number. We have a potential growth, that's true. More growth needs less migration, it's true. Africa is still the place, the continent where you have such a huge potential in terms of energy sources and raw materials. You know, I am here representing ENI. ENI among the IOCs is the most African IOC in the world because we are leading in terms of equity production among the first 7 in Africa. We are active in 16 countries. And our basic pillars, going beyond, the core of the debate, is, first of all, produce and develop resources and give it as possible to the domestic market. It's not an unusual behavior of the IOC. So if you see what we have done in the last 50 years in Egypt, in Libya, in Ghana, in Nigeria, what we are going to do in Angola, in Mozambique, is first of all, develop resources and give it to the domestic market. Because as you mentioned, as President Condé mentioned, access to energy is one of the big challenge that we have. Because it affects daily life. It affects potential growth of business, because if you don't have energy, you can't develop a true and sound business activity. In many countries of the world, not only in Africa, it has become a political challenge. We have governments that lose and win elections on the issue of energy shortage and blackouts. And let me tell you that today is also becoming a threat and a challenge in terms of environment, because when you burn biomasses and charcoal and coal in Africa, like it happens in 50% in some regions, you have something like more than 500,000 deaths every year because of health diseases caused by this unhealthy way to produce energy. We devote energy to the market. We bet, and you are right, Stefano, on human capital training, because if you want to develop a sound energy system, you need to develop a lot of human skills and human capital, and we do a lot of social projects. We appreciate what the EU Commission is doing in terms of investing in Africa, investing in renewable projects. We are developing as a company a renewable branch. You know that I'm going to say something which is different from the traditional mindset. I like when the EU Commission talks about sustainable model, because sustainable model in Africa doesn't mean only renewable, it means only gas. Natural gas is what we have adopted also in Europe as a transitional source of energy to go beyond. But Africa has a huge potential about gas. And let me tell you that even though today Africa is using in the energy pie, gas is only 16% of the total pie. In terms of flared gas every year, this is about the 30% of the total production of gas in Africa. And this is becoming a huge environmental problem. So I think that one of the challenges in order to boost Africa, to help Africa to go towards a cleaner and more sustainable model is also to, let's say, understand together how to use better natural gas. And that means to use it especially for large urban areas. We're developing a lot of projects in renewable, but in off-grid, small rural areas. But if you want to tackle the challenge of the big cities, of the mega cities, you need big projects. And basically, if you are able to use gas-to-power project, which is not renewable, I understand, but it is sustainable from a technical point of view, we can help also millions of people to get access to energy. This is what we are doing. I would like that, you know, the EU Commission could do the same choices that the European Investment Bank, the World Bank has done about financing also gas infrastructure and not only renewable infrastructure. But my main message is, okay, we are on board. We think that this is the right pathway, the right track. But please, let's try also to reconsider how the use of natural gas could boost our transition to a not only renewable but sustainable model of energy for Africa and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lap. Also, thank you for... Thank you also for having introduced this element of hybrid, let's say. Therefore, yes, maybe, yes.
Yes, I would like to take
Please.
I would like to take the lead from what was just said about gas and flaring gas in Africa. Well, I know it's not necessarily at the heart of the subject of this panel.
But better, we can animate
exactly,
it a bit. So
exactly. And I'm still also myself, I'm in transition, because I used to be in the ADB in charge of natural resources. And I'm gradually moving into my new role in the African Union as the one in charge of infrastructure and energy. So I'm in between hats. Why am I taking the lead? Because again, gas, Africa is very rich in gas. And the potential, as you rightly said, is huge. However, the issue in Africa is the domestication of gas. This is where also we should be working. And we started something very interesting at ADB on the domestication of gas in Africa. And I'm inviting the Vice President here, Mr. Gislan, to continue the work that ANRC has started on the domestication of gas. Also, with the World Bank and EBRD, there's a lot of work that was done also on the issue of flaring gas in countries like in North Africa and also in Nigeria and other countries. Again, I'm inviting ADB to please continue working on these issues, because again, Africa has, the needs are huge. And we have a huge potential when it comes to renewable energy, it's true. But we also have some of the cleanest forms of fossil fuel, if you like, which is gas that we can use. And we can also, from the oil fields make use of some of the gas that's been emitted in the air, and then to clean our climate. This is for one, but also to serve our population. So thank you very much for mentioning these two, and I really wanted to make sure that this is very well put on the panel as well when discussing renewable energy.
Good. Thank you, Commissioner. I think that I think that these are a valid point. I think that the reasoning more at large on the wider energy supply and energy production is extremely important. I would like, however, not just to say, look, let's go back to the central because we decide to do it, but it is also obvious, allow me to say, that in this very moment, as Madame Royal said at the beginning, there is also an issue of message that we are sending to the world. And I think that there is one risk that we are risk blurring a bit the message that was quite linear and clear after COP21, that the future in any case is renewable. And since in these days we are watching, let's say, to say the least, to a certain problem which is linked to the choice made so far by the American administration, I think that we have to work certainly in a pragmatic way, probably in order to, let's say, create a better offer. But I think that I would like to concentrate now on renewable because there is a slight risk that then everything is possible and everything is good. This is not what you meant. But I would like to underline that there is now a supplementary issue and reason to concentrate on AREI, on renewable, because now we have a debate about climate change. We have a debate about solution to climate change. And therefore, I would suggest to keep now taking for this debate from the main door, which is renewable. And then we know that they are much more complex, hybrid, etc. But I would like to do it because otherwise there is a bit of risk that, what is our leadership and the African leadership is turned into something a bit different. So if I may just come back to the private sector and asking Ms. Oliver Andrews, to tell a bit what they believe to be the opportunity, but also the problem, and what we can do in order to address them, in particular the risk factor, how de-risking, let's say, investment in this sector. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I'll come back to your point in a moment, because we've been instructed to concentrate on renewable. We are delighted to be able to say I think we are one of the leaders in investments in renewable energy in Africa. When we first did our wind farm some 5 years ago in Cabo Verde with EIB, 26 megawatts on 5 islands, I think the world thought a little bit, are these guys mad? What are they doing? But we knew we had plenty of wind resource in the middle of the Atlantic, and this was a country that was importing heavy fuel oil and diesel for its generators. Today, 25% of that country's energy needs is actually supplied by our wind farm. Now, there's interesting that we should discuss what this example brings. It's a company now that is thriving. It is paying dividends. I dare say we're now a 57% shareholder, and it's paying dividends. But today also, the price that was agreed under the PPA is actually a little bit now more expensive because oil prices have gone down. The question is, who picks up this cost now? Because the consumer is saying in Cabo Verde, saying, well, look, why am I paying higher price when the diesel that I was using is now cheaper? There's a bigger debate to be answered, and I think that was an issue that was docked in COP21, forgive me to say. But there's a bigger debate that we must address going forward. The other thing that I find very interesting in your opening remarks, I have just come from Copenhagen, where there are 2,000 participants in something called the Africa Energy Forum. It's going on as we speak today. Your point about widening outside this consortium is very important, because if we are going to try and institutionalize renewables, they're the ones doing it. They're the practitioners. They're there. We can do policy, but they're there. And we all need to come into this one tent. We can't be having separate conversations. We have to come together and be able. Now, much has been said this morning about 19 projects. Well, I've been long in this business, some 35 years doing infrastructure in Africa. I remember, some of you may know, there was a list by NEPAD. They had a list of projects in which there was Inga Dam, there was this, there was that, and it was the Africans who designed that, just like President said this morning. But so my question is, we can't be having lists on lists on lists. We must implement them. So we must be asking ourselves, why haven't we implemented those things? What are the roadblocks? And that comes to the point. And let me just take your time a little bit. Governments have a problem. They're taking too long to put in place the kind of framework that will leveraging the investments. They're taking too long to give you simple things like permits, authorizations, and whatever. They're taking too long to put the enabling infrastructure in place. Let's be frank. You cannot be delivering every year in Africa. Maximum power we put in Africa is about 400 to 500 megawatts. The deficit, Spain has more power in the grid than the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. Yet we're saying we're going to catch up in 2030 with 2020 with 30,000 gigawatts. I'm a practitioner. I'm telling you it's not possible if we continue the way we are. We need to change. The private sector also needs to change a little bit. Its approach in many of these countries is that government fails. It doesn't understand sometimes that even within a government, you can have different objectives and culture. The Minister of Energy, God bless their cotton socks, they want energy, they want power on the grid. But the Ministry of Finance cannot give any more guarantees because the IMF has stopped them from giving guarantees. So it goes on. So you understand the cultural context in which you're situated in. And my last point then is to my friends. You know, I am the youngest kid on the block when it comes to DFIs. But we can't continue as if all these dollars that's been pouring into Africa since, I don't know, 60s. We are now worse off than we were in terms of the infrastructure deficit. Something is wrong. So we must take a step back and say maybe the existing institutions do not have all the answers. They don't, so therefore they should disrupt it a little bit and actually let us be honest with ourselves. And if we're going to come with a new instrument like EU is doing, and I fully support the EIP, but the mechanism for delivery doesn't have to be the traditional sources or the traditional institutions. Look, it's saying if somebody mentioned about the phone today and the mobile phones, how they've taken off in Africa, I dare to you today, if you want to put renewable in the marketplace and you want to disrupt that marketplace, you've got to look at how not only technology, but our processes in delivering aid changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Start arriving to the unpleasant parts of my work of moderator, just to recall 4 minutes for intervention, because otherwise we'll go out and this room is already booked. Now, just to keep going on with the private sector, I would like to ask Monsieur Bruno Bensasson, the Chief Executive Officer for Africa of ENGIE, just to share also his experience and to share his problems, maybe.
Merci, merci Stéphane.
Thank you, Stefano. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. ENGIE used to be called GDF Suez and has been present in Africa for a good 60 years in energy, amongst other fields. And we've worked in Guinea, Conakry, in fields of energy, electricity, and natural gas. We currently have about 3,000 megawatts and other projects which are either centralized or decentralized. And I want to say that we have witnessed positive trends, and just to bring a note of positivity to the debate. And there are very promising projects developing in Africa, from Morocco to South Africa, across Kenya, Zambia, the Côte d'Ivoire. We have seen more and more regulatory frameworks which are being set up, and they will foster these projects. Some of them have support from the EU, and we hope that AREI will continue that good work. Second piece of good news, the prices are going down. So thanks to solar, wind power, we've seen prices go down. That's good news for Africa, because they have this wealth of natural resources centrally and in a decentralized structure. We've also seen that the projects that have worked have shown that you can revolutionize a sector within the space of a few years, and they're acting as a catalyst promoting decentralized energies. And so this was discussed yesterday. We have cooperation between private and public stakeholders. We can actually achieve a huge percentage of renewable energy by 2050. If you look at telecoms, for example, you can see what is possible. If you look at solar energy, imagine that 1 billion people would have to wait until 2050 to have modern electricity in their homes. But there's a great deal of frustration. Obviously, we have seen some progress in micro networks, but there are still blackouts, electricity cuts, and the large-scale projects have only seen 5 such large-scale projects actually reaching completion successfully. So that is a failing. We need to look at each case and see why they have worked or not. We need a sound regulatory framework. We need the heads of state and governments, the decision makers, to really understand the importance of cost-reflective prices for energy. If you have the right regulatory framework, I think anything is possible. You can fund centralized and decentralized production, you can ensure sound distribution. But if you do not have that framework, I fear that we're not going to be able to really make most of that leveraging effect that has been spoken about already. So we have seen success stories in many African countries. I think that we are witnessing a very positive trend, and this forum is excellent, an excellent opportunity, because it is within this forum where you have public and private stakeholders, those from Africa and elsewhere, financing representatives and industry, all brought together to discuss these very important topics. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
That we have to finish to 15 to 1. Therefore, we have really 4 minutes per intervention. May I ask you, Commissioner Abu Zeid, now, there is an issue which is about regulatory framework. This has been underlined by everybody and is also well known. Now, the African Union Commission, which is a policymaker and which is also the institution is suggesting right policies at the Pan-African level. What are your plans in order to push in concrete terms, in order to reach a level of regulation which, in terms of administrative practice, in terms of regulatory framework, can be helpful and more conducive in order to help this kind of investment?
Thank you very much for this question. And as it was mentioned here on this panel, the framework and the policies are key for all of this to work. So one thing is the physical investments, the physical infrastructure and the investments. The other one is the soft infrastructure that is supposed to make all this work. So this is the role that we have at the African Union. And as you heard just now from the private sector perspective, there are cases where it works. There are other cases where it doesn't necessarily work. And when it doesn't work, it's not because there isn't a political will to make it work. Sometimes it's also the capacity of the countries to introduce such frameworks or to harmonize their positions, even within the same government. So that's the role of the African Union, and this is where we come in. So to capacitate our countries and to demonstrate, there's also the demonstration effect, to demonstrate that it can work and it should work, and that we capacitate these governments to work at the national level, but also to work with each other. Because again, at the end of the day, what we would like to see as the African Union is an integrated Africa. And one of our roles is also to promote the interconnections between countries. So it's not just about the generation of power. which is very important from renewable sources, because it's the future, and because of the huge potential that exists in Africa. So this is one element that we are focusing on and that we are intensifying, the capacitating the governments and making them see the benefits of adopting climate-friendly approaches when it comes to power generation, but also making them see the benefits of pooling these generation in order to facilitate or to create a larger market for the energy that's being produced, and hence have a positive effect when it comes to the cost, and which ultimately will also lead to as I said, to the integration of Africa. The other aspect where we come in is the human resources that are needed to implement and maintain these huge infrastructures. Renewable energy in many of these of their aspects are relatively new technologies for many of our African countries, not all of them. And they need, our countries need also to change the curricula sometimes in our education institutions in order to include these new concepts and to avail the human resources needed in order to implement and maintain. And one good example for that, something that I was very closely linked with because I initiated it with the help of other partners, is the solar power plant in Morocco, the largest in the world, the Ouarzazate one. One of the things we did is not only look at the physical part, but definitely look even at the curriculum at all levels, what is needed in terms of human resources at all levels, from technicians, engineers, but also the managers, and see what are the educational institutions within the country that can deliver the skills needed on time. I wanted to talk also about the benefits, or to help our countries see beyond the grid, because often also all the concentration of attention is going into the national grid or the continental grid. But this is where renewable energy are also very interesting, because they can also provide off-grid and mini-grid solutions. And this is where we need to work with our governments, but definitely with the private sector, in order to promote these off-grid and mini-grid solutions. And for that, of course, we call upon our economic arm, the African Development Bank, but also on all other partners, EU and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Abouzeid. Now, precisely turning to the banks, starting from the African Development Bank, Pierre Guillain, and then passing to the European Investment Bank. African Development Bank, European Investment Bank. Let's see a bit how these two aspects can complement each other, starting from the African Development Bank and then look for the European Investment Bank.
Thank you, Stefano. First, a great pleasure to be here. The African Development Bank is Africa's development bank. So it's not just a name, it's also our reality. We are very proud that the African heads of state and government have asked us to host the independent delivery unit for AREI. We are strongly committed to the renewable agenda, but as the Commissioner said, it's part of a broader set of solutions. And so what we also committed to is to implement the Paris Agreement. And that means for us that we will increase the share of climate financing as part of our overall financing costs. So different objectives, but common goals. One of our top 5 priorities, the high fives, is to light up and power Africa. And this will only happen if we manage to increase the renewable energy in a major way. I agree with a number of participants here saying that, to me, the main driver will be to find a way to replicate what Africa did so successfully in the telecom and mobile area. And new technologies enable that, but current policies and regulations are not quite there yet in terms of supporting it. I think that while we do need these big mega power systems, and we are part of the financiers of these systems and will continue to be so, we also need this disruptive, more decentralized power generation, whether this grid connected or not grid connected, whether it's individual homes or mini grids. So we're quite strongly committed to this, both through AREI, through our off-grid energy access fund, to our facility for energy inclusion, and a number of other mechanisms. We also happen to work, and I hope Luca will confirm this, extremely well with the European Investment Bank, and we see this as a very powerful partnership, and we look forward to the EU's external investment plan also to structure our partnership, in particular in areas that do require blended financing guarantees and other mechanisms, and renewable energy is one of those. So again, we are a financier of development. We work extremely well with a number of partners, including my neighbor here and other private sector partners. Our goal is to, the two fastest growing areas of financing at the African Development Bank are, one, in terms of sector energy, and two, in terms of partners, private sector. The only way we'll be able to match or to bridge this financing gap in Africa is by leveraging public resources massively with private investment, and that includes the type of de-risking instruments that you are proposing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pierre. Now, Luca, we have the AREI, we have a good list. Which is your favorite project in that list?
Well, I think, I mean, let me try and focus on renewable as a start, because the discussion can be very vast. I mean, from an institutional perspective, I don't have to convince anyone about energy being really one of the drivers of what we do. If we look at the African continent, it's 4 billion, that covers various sectors, but let's go to the renewable one, because that's most important. Renewable for us is important not so much because it fits with energy, but it does fit with environment, and the way we go about assessing energy project takes more and more into account the environmental footprint, as we know, and it has to do with a big commitment of the bank, and that is to increase its climate action component of its lending from 25% to 35% in non-EU countries by 2020, which is not one of those objectives, loose objectives that sometimes we will have. I can tell you that is really reshaping the way we do our business. Now, renewable, I think obviously there's a lot of needs. I mean, there's a huge demand, and there's space for everything. There's huge projects, generations, you have big projects serving urban areas, but you also have, and it's been said, indeed, also we need to generate power rural areas. And we know the importance that renewable have, for instance, for mini-grid or non-grid projects. I mean, data tell us that in 15 years' time, 70%, two-thirds of increase in generation for these mini-grid and no-grid projects will be provided by renewable energy. And we are giving a lot of importance to that. We do look into that. It is time-consuming, I have to confess, but we look into that. To your point, Stefano, instruments, budget requirements, yes, there's a need, but technology comes our way and comes the way of the private sector. Technology today is not what technology was 5 years ago. We have mature technologies, be it hydro, be it, of course, the wind, which remain mature but much more cost-effective. And then we have developing technologies such as solar, which are now mature. So the economics of these renewable projects are changing over time. As of now, we see them. The reality points to us that projects are cost-effective. The need for investment grants, to which we were used to in the past, and MDBs like us were sort of channeling, it's definitely going down. And more of the attention is towards de-risking, and you mentioned that word in your opening statement. And in that sense, I think for us, EIB and others, we have to learn from that. And we also have to take steps in that direction, which, by the way, also means better leveraging public resources. We have some pilot cases we're working on with reinsurance companies in Africa, and I'm sure that that is something we can learn from. Equally, what we're doing, of course, we do lend directly to projects, but when it comes to smaller projects, we definitely are pushing in favor of supporting equity through equity investments. Again, it goes back to the notion of de-risking. Equity stands for layered structure risk diversification among investors, it doesn't really mean providing grants to the project. And that is the direction where we see us going.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luca. Now, Courtney Gale, young leader. Now, you have been listening to, let's say, the present protagonists and leaders. At least they show a big awareness and even a strong commitment. Now you are a bit in the middle. You are a young leader of a movement in particular, and you are certainly a leader of the future. What you expect out of it, and what you would like to bring over in order to consolidate not only an awareness, but also a reality. And therefore, which is the message that you can pass in order to push everybody, maybe to do it better, to do it faster, to do it in a way that you then take over something which will be already structured. Please, Courtney.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from the private sector, we've heard from financing institutions, we've heard from governments, we've heard from African Union. Now I'd like to give you the most important voice in development, the voice of the youth. And as a young person who represented Africa at COP21, as one of the young people who drafted the Youth Resolution on Climate Change in Paris, I was particularly proud and very excited when I first read the framework for the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, or AREI. So as someone working on the ground, the potential that this framework could have was almost unbelievable to me. And I really see this as a fantastic opportunity, not only to involve youth and women in this initiative, which is my personal background, but as to revitalize our continent. So I'd like to take this from the perspective, as I mentioned, my perspective, that of women and youth, and give a youth response to this initiative. And I think it's important to note that yesterday in the opening ceremony of EDD, there was mentioned many times how important it is to include women and youth and put them at the center of development to ensure that it is whole and inclusive. And I'm really happy in particular to see that AREI included an aspect in the policy of gender-sensitive policies, because as many of us know, women and children in particular often bear the brunt of energy poverty, and they have been the victims of previous policies in energy that have been gender blind. And just as an example that was mentioned by Madame Royale earlier, you know, women living in rural communities who have to go each day and collect sources of energy for themselves, walking under these big structures, these big power lines, and yet not having access to electricity or to energy. Over the years, there have been many investments in energy in Africa, renewable and conventional energy, and yet we still see this massive gap in gender access to electricity. Unacceptable in 2017, if you ask my opinion. And this is for a particular reason, quite a practical reason. When you're investing in energy, you'd invest in the formal economy, and many women in Africa operate in the informal economy. And so I would implore those implementing this initiative to understand the context of women and to take that into account when they are implementing this initiative. Secondly, I would like to say that many people would see this as a challenge, but I see this as an opportunity to address the African youth bulge and the concerns around that in terms of this framework. So my one comment on both the AREI and the Sustainable Energy for All framework is that youth is not mentioned once in either framework. And in Africa, 60% of the population is under the age of 35, and there's a huge problem of youth unemployment. So I would like to suggest that as this framework, we see it as an opportunity not only to tackle environmental challenges, energy challenges, infrastructure challenges, but to use it as an opportunity to tackle youth unemployment in Africa. And I believe that this has the huge potential to revitalize the youth of Africa and to ensure that they become more involved and become stakeholders in their continent once more, because I feel as though they've been left out of these conversations for too long. And as we all know, energy is an enabler for development. And so not only will initiatives such as AREI promote economic growth, they will also are important in creating new markets, in providing apprenticeships, in providing the updates to educational curriculums that youth need. And I think that this is really an opportunity to maintain maintain and retain the rich human capital that Africa has, from losing youth to other continents such as America and Europe. I really see this as an opportunity to keep youth on our continent and to keep them engaged in these discussions. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to please implore the panel, please give us the opportunity, give us a chance, trust us. We're more capable than you might think. And so that's one thing I'd love to say. And in closing, to me personally, the SDGs mean that no one gets left behind. And as a 22-year-old South African working on the ground, I see AREI as a fantastic opportunity to ensure that women and youth are not left behind in this initiative to really take our continent to the next level.
Thank you, Courtney, because this is the moment that I hate the most, the moderator, that I cannot allow to go on with question and answer because time is over. But I would like to say that probably the formula to wrap up was exactly what Courtney just said. Just recalling also that these European Development Days are precisely under 2 stars, gender and youth. And I think that to call on a collective responsibility, which is in the making, in thinking, in involving, in trusting, I think probably for me is the best way to wrap up this session. I will simply invite you, because I apologize for material reasons, we cannot go on with the further comment and question, because literally this place is taken over by other events. I would invite you to keep networking, as we say, here around, in order maybe to contact also personally the different panelists, in order to maybe go a bit more in deep on a certain number of points. But I would like to thank you all first for your contribution, and thank you to the public. Thank you, Courtney, also for this conclusion, which was very tough and very full of push for all of us. And thank you again for your participation.